I'm TProphet, and I did something a little bit crazy, and I think that probably I shouldn't be the only person to do the same crazy things. So that's what I'm going to share with everybody today. Why you should move to an Exclave, and we'll see if my clicker works. Does it work? Is it working? Yes, no, maybe? Clicker's not working. Oh, well. So this is the house that I used to live in, and it's in a gritty industrial suburb of Seattle called Renton. If you've flown on a Boeing 737, it was built in this town. There's a big Boeing factory, and the other thing that it's best known for is a very noisy chunk of well-used 405 freeway called the Renton S-curves, which I lived just above. And so in 2020, I was living in 1,000 square feet of house, working from home. I had a view of the freeway all day. And, you know, the house is built in 1943. It was never built very well because it was built for Boeing workers during the war, and it was intended to be temporary housing, and then it just kind of ended up being, a multi-generational home. And the thing always needed work, and it was drafty in the winter, and I just wasn't really happy living there, especially in the middle of a pandemic, because, the walls kind of close in on you when you're living in a pandemic, right? We all experience that. So one day I asked myself, just what in the heck am I doing with my life? I work remote. I can live anywhere that I want to in the U.S. I could live in other countries even. I could even live in really unusual or remote places. And, I kind of weighed moving some of the places that I'd always dreamed about, because we always dream about maybe living in a tropical paradise in Hawaii or something along those lines. But that's not very practical for me. My family lives in the Seattle area, and I like to travel, and I like the amenities of a city, honestly. So given all of that, what should I do? And what I ended up doing is remembering that this little corner that's circled in red exists. It's in the Lower Mainland area, which is the greater Vancouver, BC area, but it hangs just underneath the border. When they drew the border, the 49th parallel is how it was demarcated between the United States and the British territories, which are now known as Canada. And this little 5 square mile chunk was left hanging down there. And I went and started looking at real estate. And honestly, this place is one of the most unusual and beautiful places in the world. The sunsets really do look like this. There's no filter on this at all. I just took that on my cell phone, and you get to experience that almost every day. It's really clear because it's in a rain shadow, highly unusual for the Pacific Northwest. And if you work with me, you'll know this. I literally join my meetings from the beach, because there's 4 wonderful beach parks, so I can just basically walk from my house, taking my meetings remotely, and hang out on the beach while I do this. I mean, your company culture may vary. You might not be allowed to work remotely, or your coworkers might be jealous if you check in from the beach. Nobody minds. I get to do that. That's just kind of what I like to do. Canada's literally across the street. If you look at the picture on the left, that's looking from the Canadian side into the United States. Oh my goodness. Now, that better not be a Lefroy 25 bottle with Malort inside. You guys really got me that?
Well, I mean, not everything.
Not everything. Yeah, I mean, I'll take a drink out of that, but definitely, keep the bottle to yourselves. So BSides Las Vegas, for those of you who don't know this, you can make as a speaker what they call an outrageous request. And so I made an absolutely outrageous request for a bottle of Lefroy 25. Now, that bottle of scotch, if there really is Lefroy 25 inside it, is a $550 bottle of scotch. And in no way did I expect BSides to honor that. It was just a completely flippant. They said outrageous request. It was outrageous. So, and a bottle of this has just showed up. And I insist, do you drink scotch?
I do. Yes.
You must pour yourself some.
As a matter of fact, I have.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Okay. Oh, wonderful. Okay. Very good. Cheers. Oh my goodness, this is so good.
Take this one too.
You sure?
Yeah.
Oh wow, that is a wonderful, wonderful malt. I don't know if any of you drink Scotch, but this is kind of one of the holy grails.
Pleasure.
Cheers. Wow. Okay, so this is something that I can't take to Canada because I'd have to pay duty, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. But Canada, as I was saying, is across the street. Now, on the left, that's looking from the Canadian side into Point Roberts. There's just a white sign that says, hey, this is the U.S. If you walk across here, you might get in trouble. The middle picture is looking at the exact same spot from the U.S. side. And then all the way on the right, Canada's literally across the street. This is around 900 meters from my house. The houses on the right side of the street are in Canada. The road itself and the houses on the left side are in the United States. And that's basically what the border looks like. So very different experience than the U.S.'s southern border. I'm going to keep trying this and see if it does anything. It doesn't. Bought the cheapest clicker on Amazon, and sometimes it works. So low housing costs. So I'm totally doxing myself here. I've never given a talk with my real name in it. And now you're looking at a picture of my house. That's where I live on the left-hand side. It's literally $1 million less than in Canada to buy a home on Point Roberts. And this is why I was able to do it. I mean, Vancouver is one of the world's most expensive cities for housing. I think that only Hong Kong is more expensive. And I was able to get into a almost brand new 2017 built 4-bedroom home that's 1,900 square feet for $499. And at the rate that I financed at, that translates to a housing payment of around $1,900 a month, which is less than a 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. So, and actually less than a 1-bedroom apartment in many parts of Seattle. So, if you look at the right, that's a screen cap from Zillow, and it just shows the property valuations. The picture that I showed in the last image, where you saw Canada across the street from the U.S., this is an aerial view of that. And what you can see is that the numbers on the Canadian side are roughly $1 million more for almost exactly the same house on one side of the border versus the other. So it really is kind of a total hack. And most importantly, Jimbo Maidenbauer Meowser the First approves of the additional space. We were living on top of each other. He's a very active 2-year-old cat who loves to play and run around, and now he has 2 floors to do it. So when people say, did you buy the house for your cat? I'm like, I don't know. I guess for both of us. I do spoil him way too much. So you might wonder about taxes. You know, what's the tax situation if you're right next to Canada? Well, the tax situation is exactly the same as if you're in Washington State, because that's where you are. So it's legally the United States. Anybody can move there if you have the right to live in the U.S., with an asterisk next to it, and I'll get to that later. So there's no immigration formalities at all. It's legally the United States, so U.S. taxes apply if you are working for a U.S. company, if you can work remotely. Whatever tax rate you're paying, you would pay in Washington State. That's basically going to be what you will pay in Point Roberts. There is no state income tax in Washington, so that's pretty awesome. Whatcom County has lower property taxes than Central Puget Sound. So if you're from the Seattle area, or if you've been looking at the Seattle area as a potential place to move to, if you're in the Bay Area or LA, kind of hoping to get away from the high taxes in California, but still be on the West Coast, you're going to be way lower on property taxes living a little bit further north. Car tabs are hundreds of dollars less expensive, and honestly, I feel like I'm getting away with something by living there. Just financially, it works out so much better. And Point Roberts itself is very stable and secure, and so that is a bit of a concern. Who has concerns over the current state of stability of the United States right now? Anybody? Given what's been going on politically, I mean, Some of us feel fairly secure where we are. I've been all over the world, 76 countries and territories and counting, all 7 continents, and I know where things end up when they continue on the trajectory they have. And it turns into a lot of dysfunction, stuff like the power not staying on and water not being drinkable and that kind of thing. So for me, the fact that the power is provided by BC Hydro and marketed by Puget Sound Energy is a plus, because I feel like their ability to deliver reliable infrastructure over time is likely to be better. The water comes from the city of Vancouver. It's marketed by a local water district, but it's good quality water, and it's run by the city of Vancouver, where I expect that supply to continue and be reliable. It's very, very difficult for anybody with a criminal record to access Point Roberts. And so that's the thing to keep in mind is, even if you've got a DUI, that is something that is a really big problem to get through Canada. So the other thing that I think is an upside or a downside, depending on whether you like guns, I personally don't. I want nothing to do with them, and I don't want to own any. And I don't like being around them. Now, we all have different opinions on guns, but the discharge of a firearm is illegal on Point Roberts. There is no federal firearms dealer, so there's no way to get any really high-powered weapons over there. And you could really only bring them in on a boat, but then you're not allowed to shoot them. So it works out pretty well, because the Canadians just don't want to have a whole lot of guns right next to their border. And most people on Point Roberts just really don't want a lot of gun activity. So effectively, they're illegal. Unfortunately, so is marijuana. So even though it's legal on both sides of the border, in Washington State and in BC, it's federally illegal in both countries to bring marijuana across a border. So it's, until that stupidity ends, no weed. You can do CBD products, and some of those are Delta-9 and edibles. So if you enjoy the experience of cannabis, there's ways to get it legally. But the dispensaries that you can go to in Washington, there just aren't any on Point Roberts. Licensing is too complicated and expensive. It's too small a population to make it economic. And one thing with the security that I think is pretty awesome is it's so secure that it's rumored that the Federal Witness Protection Program shelters their most critical protectees in Point Roberts, as well as some other locations around the country. Of course, I don't have any direct knowledge of this. It would be allegedly in a very well secured location, but that gives you an idea of the level of security of this place, right? I think it's probably one of the most secure communities in the U.S. And it's even YouTube famous. If you search for Point Roberts on YouTube, you'll find a couple of videos. One says that we're going to be sold to Canada. There's this Russian YouTuber who lives in Vancouver and did a semi-accurate video on the place. But it's starting to get some attention as well. But what about the border? Everybody asks about this because crossing borders is stressful. And what's it like to live in a place where if you want to go over to the mainland of the U.S., you're crossing 4 borders? That's real. And this place, that's our entry point, and I'm there a lot. Well, we all cross the border a lot, and the border guards are people that we get to know. They're all humans, and they know us. And so it's routine, and it's usually fast once you, for one, know and follow the rules, because if you're not following rules, that's going to get you on the list of people that they look more closely at, and that's not something you want. So you do pay attention to the rules, present yourself as somebody who wants to follow them and intends to do so, and you will generally have a very smooth experience. Both Canada and the U.S. maintain border crossings at Point Roberts. Not all the exclaves do. There's not a formal border crossing at the Northwest Angle in Minnesota. You have to call in by video in both directions. And in Hyder, Alaska, which is one of the other U.S. exclaves, there's just no border checks at all going into the U.S. There is a border check going from back into BC from the Alaska side. And that's good for us because it means that Point Roberts is considered the United States, so you can order any of your online shopping, and it's not subject to any sort of Canada customs. It gets kind of complicated, and also gas is sold at the same prices as it is in the U.S. If we didn't have that border, then probably the U.S. and Canada would have to agree that Point Roberts would be part of the Canadian customs zone, and so we'd be paying Canadian taxes for everything. And that is kind of the deal that Hyder Alaska has, but there's hardly anything in Hyder, so it works for them. If you're going to go to the mainland U.S., as I mentioned before, you're crossing into Canada, driving across it, and then back into the U.S. And so this means that there are some border formalities. The app on the right-hand side that there's a screenshot of is called ArriveCan, and the Canadian government requires you to fill out this app every time that you cross their border. It was put in place for the pandemic. Hopefully it goes away at some point. These things, though, never go away, really. So it may just be a thing that we're going to have to fill out indefinitely. So a couple of things with, from a privacy perspective, the Canadian government has refused to state whether or not they track you using this app. So personally, I install it on a phone that I can either bring with me or not and fill it out that way. I tend to bring the phone along when I want the Canadian government to know exactly where I was at all times. And right now, that's pretty much everywhere that I am in Canada, because it makes things a lot easier if they verify that what you told them at the border is true. But that is, obviously your call, and it's a privacy concern that some people would have. So border authorities do put you in the system as a local. And so if you are what's considered a habitual resident of Point Roberts and the Canadian government agrees that you are, then they will put you in as a habitual resident. And that means that you can use certain features of the ArriveCan app that are not available to people that don't live on the point full time. And Nexus is your friend. So Nexus is a program that's jointly between the Canadian and the U.S. government. And you can sign up for this, and what it does is it enables you to use an expedited border crossing lane in both the United States and Canada. So it's kind of like global entry. But if you have global entry, you can only use that lane with the U.S. side, and you can go through that lane in both the U.S. and the Canadian side if you have Nexus. So the thing with Nexus is it's pretty hard to get. For one, you have to be interviewed by both the U.S. and Canadian governments, and right now, because of a dispute over whether or not U.S. customs agents can carry guns inside of Canada, only the U.S.-based Nexus enrollment centers are open because the U.S. border guards can carry guns there. The Canadians aren't going to let them carry guns inside of Canadian airports. And so all of those locations are indefinitely closed, meaning that half the capacity to process interviews is effectively missing right now. On top of that, if you want Nexus, you can only interview and apply at an enrollment center near the Canadian border. So if you're going to do global entry, just anytime you're coming back from an international trip at any U.S. entry point, you can do that interview. And you cannot do that for Nexus. Like, it has to be only in designated enrollment centers. And the appointments are backed up a year, so it's really a pain in the neck to get it. But if you have it, it really is your friend when you live on the point because it saves a ton of time. If you leave a lot, and I leave some. I mean, I come here, but I spend most of my time on the point. People wonder about border restrictions. I mean, when you're crossing, you can get searched. They can seize your stuff. There's very expansive border search authority that both countries have when you cross the border. So what does that mean in practical terms in day-to-day life? Well, the borders are open 24/7, first of all. So if you need to cross a border, it's available and you can totally do that. You need to have a clean criminal history. No felonies as Canada defines them, and that's why no DUIs, because a DUI in the U.S. isn't a felony, but it is in Canada, and Canada will not let you in if you committed what they consider to be a felony in Canada. So your criminal record, it's got to be pretty much completely clean, or before you consider moving up there, you should talk to the Canadian CBSA and make sure that according to their understanding, you're going to be cleared to go through Canada, because otherwise it's going to be really bad for you. And yeah, once you live there, don't get a DUI. Don't do bad stuff, because if you do, that's also going to make your life very complicated. You've got to have the right to live in the United States to live in Point Roberts. And so this is another thing that people ask a lot. Well, if I live in Vancouver, can't I just buy a house in Point Roberts and commute and live there and do the same house hack that you did? Well, no, because if you're Canadian and you're in the United States for more than 183 days a year, that's too many days, and you get kicked out for 6 months. So it's not something, unfortunately, that's available unless you're a dual citizen and you've got a U.S. passport too. And a lot of people on Point Roberts are dual citizens. 75% of residents have passports from both countries, and so they can commute to jobs in Canada and live on Point Roberts, and that's totally fine. But the same applies in reverse. So if you live on Point, if you want to live in Canada and you have only a U.S. passport, the Canadians aren't going to let you do that either. They have the same 183-day restriction, and this can complicate cross-border relationships. So say that you fall in love with somebody who lives in a different country, and most of the people in the Vancouver area are north of the border. They're not on Point Roberts. Well, you're going to have to count your days of who's staying overnight at whose house, and you're not going to easily be able to combine your home without paperwork. So just keep that in mind. So more on border searches and restrictions. People just, really are very focused on this area, and I get it. I mean, it's kind of scary crossing borders. Most of us don't do it very often. It's certainly not twice a day like many Point Roberts residents do, each direction. And so what are the rules? You can't have more than $800 pre-tax in goods that you're importing from Canada. So if I go up to Canadian Tire and I buy, for instance, like a steel pergola for my back patio, which I did, what they do is they take the price in Canadian dollars, convert it to US, they subtract the tax, convert that amount to US dollars, and it needs to be under $800. If it's over $800, that's actually fine. You're allowed to bring stuff in from Canada. It's no problem. You just have to pay tax on it. And the tax rate isn't very high, and they only charge it on the difference. And usually they just don't want to do the paperwork. So just declare everything when you bring it across. If they ask if you bought something in Canada, just say what you did, and usually they'll wave you through. It's only if you're buying really expensive stuff like a car or something like that in Canada that customs and paperwork gets involved. It's relatively easy to transport things through Canada from the mainland. So if you want to go over to the mainland and go to the Home Depot in Bellingham and bring stuff back through Canada, now technically you're supposed to do paperwork and pay tax on it when you bring it into Canada, and then claim the tax back at the Boundary Bay port of entry. And that's more paperwork, and you basically did a lot of paperwork, paid money, it was refunded, and everyone wasted their time. So in practice, what the border guards will ask is, do you plan to stop in Canada, or are you driving straight through? And if you make an attestation that you're driving straight through, then they'll let you do that, usually with things you bought for your house or whatever. And one question they'll ask a lot is, do you have anything with you that you're planning to leave in Canada? Now, if you do have things with you that you plan to leave in Canada, if you've got gifts, for example, that you want to give to a friend that lives in Canada, depending on what the value of that is, there could be paperwork and duty charged, and the Canadian government is really sticklers about charging that duty. So they're going to make you pay and do all the paperwork. And so it's better if you're going to get a gift for somebody in Canada. Amazon delivers to a locker. Like Amazon Canada has lockers, and there is at the 7-Eleven just across the border, there's an Amazon locker. So you can just order something from Amazon Canada, pay the Canadian tax, have it delivered to an Amazon locker, and then you've got your gift for your Canadian friend, and you don't have to deal with any of that. And of course, it's only 15 minutes to the largest mall in British Columbia. So you've got plenty of shopping in Tsawwassen. There's really no reason to buy stuff in the U.S. and bring it to Canadians. So yes, you can be searched anytime for any reason. However, keep in mind that the Border Search Authority of Customs and Border Protection in the United States is really expansive. If you live within 100 miles of a border, they can show up and search you anytime they want to. So it's really no different at the border. And that authority is rarely exercised outside of a border crossing. It's also relatively rarely exercised at a border crossing if you're somebody who's a routine border crosser and they know what your travel patterns are, and especially if you've been pre-cleared as a trusted traveler. So, in practice, you don't get searched much. They totally can do it anytime they want to for any or no reason, and you need to be prepared for that. But also, if you don't have anything you're not supposed to have, then there's not any problem. They just wasted their time and yours, and you just have to plan that into your day that anytime you cross the border, it could be an extra hour while they decide to look through your stuff. Generally speaking, it's really rare. Unless you really tick off a border guard or you happen to be bringing something that's a flagged item that that they're required to dig deeper because of, and certain pesticides and those kinds of things can cause a deeper search. Those are like agricultural items. If you declare a prohibited agricultural item, they're probably going to want to look at all your fruits and vegetables and meats just to make sure they're all there. They're all okay. But generally speaking, you don't get searched a ton if you're not obviously up to anything shady and you're a regular border crosser. So some local amenities. Most of my shopping is up in Tawasin. Most of the stuff that I do is on the Canadian side. But we do have some local amenities as well. There's a full-service supermarket. We've got one grocery store. It's around the same size as a Safeway or Kroger if you're from that part of the country. There's a Bitcoin ATM, which I think is kind of funny. There's 5 gas stations, 2 mini marts, fuel sold in liters, which is a little bit unusual. Costs are comparable at the gas stations to Seattle prices, so you're going to pay around the same as you would in Seattle. That's a little bit more than on the U.S. mainland in Washington, but it's also way easier to come into Point Roberts from the Vancouver area. So we sell a lot of gas, and it's 50 cents a gallon, maybe more than the Bellingham Costco. There's a full-service marina with a fuel truck and chandlery, and that actually gets a ton of boater traffic because boaters who are heading to Canada for fishing usually will stop off and they'll fill their big boat tanks with much less expensive gasoline than in Canada. There's a K through 3 school, and that's really fun. So it's a one-classroom school with one teacher, and kindergartners through 3rd graders go to school on the Point. After 3rd grade, they get bused over to Blaine, which means that the kids are crossing 4 borders a day. They all have to have passports. And it's an extra hour of commute time. It makes it a little hard on the kids because unless their parents can go drive through 4 borders and pick them up, they can't do any after school activities or anything, and they also have to get up really early to be able to make it. So if you have school age kids or you're planning to have them, do consider whether or not that's something you want to do. Many of the tech people who live on Point Roberts, our salaries in the tech industry tend to be a little bit higher, and so than most of the locals there. And so it could be affordable to send your kids to private school in Tawasin. It's, way cheaper than international schools in most cases. So that can pencil out for a lot of people. And then it's just 10 minutes away instead of, that hour commute, and after school activities become more practical. There's one bank with an ATM that dispenses USD. It's a bank called Umpqua. It's a local bank from Oregon, and we're grateful to have it. It's the only bank that's left. Banner Bank closed and left. If you fly your own plane, or if you want to, there's a grass airstrip. It's legally in the United States. There are no customs clearing facilities at Point Roberts Airport. You have to clear customs back into the U.S. in Bellingham. But if you want to fly back and forth between mainland Washington and Point Roberts, you can do that. And that gets interesting, right? Because it's not that far to Seattle. So you actually could commute by plane down there if you had to, work at Microsoft or something like that. And hardware store is called Nielsen's, and they offer a full line. Plus, they have U-Haul rentals. Keep monkeying into this thing. Wish my clicker worked. Hey, it works. Okay. Laptop figured out how to make my clicker work. Great. So there's even more local services. We've got 3 restaurants and a food truck, Mexican food coming soon. Antonio Sula, one of the locals, was making Mexican food at the deli of the marketplace, but he's decided to branch out on his own and do a food truck, and his food is awesome. It's all completely legit. Their potty wagon comes and does portable toilets, and they pump your septic, and that's good because every home has septic, so you should get to know them. If you need your roof cleaned, your windows washed, any of that kind of thing, there's a Bellingham company that will come over and provide services on the Point. There is one local guy, but he's battling some health problems right now, so for now, the Bellingham company is the one that can come and do it. There's a mechanic and a detail shop, and so anything you need done with your car, you can get done on the Point, which is great. or they can at least patch it up enough that you can get up to Canadian Tire, which is 15 minutes away, and that's a full-service shop that can do anything. And then there's a newspaper even, which is kind of wild, but it's a monthly. It's like actually printed on dead trees. It's called the All Point Bulletin, and it's online as well, so feel free to take a look at it. Pat Grubb is the editor and writes most of the stories, and honestly, it's like pretty well done. They cover issues that are relevant to our area. It's like true local journalism, and you just don't see that very much anymore. So the phone and internet situation, when people, talk to me, they say there's got to be a catch. Like, what's the deal here? Well, the deal is, like, if you look at Power 10 megabits. That's my internet's like I've got the next tier up. It's 15 megabits down and 2 up, and that's all I can get. So you have to get creative. You have to think like a hacker if you want to have faster internet. So would-be telephone is pretty bad, at least in terms of the service that they're offering. That's not just me saying that. The Washington State Department of Commerce ran a study of communities across the state of Washington, and Point Roberts rated the slowest. So would-be telephone is providing, as ranked by the Washington State Department of Commerce, the slowest internet service in the state. Thank you, would-be telephone. So some people use Starlink with varying results. It does drop out a bit, and we've got tall trees everywhere, and so that makes it pretty tough. Also, we're pretty far north, right on the 49th parallel, which means a lot of atmosphere to punch through. Makes it kind of tough for Zoom calls, but when it works, it does work really well and is fast, according to the people that have it. There's going to be fiber to the home, allegedly, from would-be telephones starting in 2025. They got very large grants from the USDA, of all things, millions of dollars of money, federal money. So far, they've dug some trenches, and they've got some spools of fiber around. There's nothing really going on right now because they have some issue getting their upstream connectivity from Bell Canada turned on, or so they claim. And Verizon has a tower with LTE on it, and that can go up to 20, 30 megabits sometimes. You can get a solid 15 at any given point. So maybe you do some Verizon and you mix it up with a DSL, or maybe you go for Starlink and that works for you. It just really depends what you're doing. I spend a lot of time on Zoom, and so I need something that's pretty reliable. The good news with Zoom is it's just really good at dealing with terrible connectivity. That's just one of the things that they do a great job at. And so for me, and the stuff and the kind of work that I do, which is mostly working in Google Apps and having Zoom calls, it works pretty well for ADSL. It just gets really annoying if you want to run more than one device, or if you're trying to stream 4K or something like that. Logistics. So people ask, like, what are the logistics? How do you even get stuff there? It's, that's got to be really hard, clearing 2 borders. So in order to get anything large onto the point, you either need to bring it yourself, and you can totally do that, or you can hire Point Roberts Auto Freight to bring it in their bonded carrier. And so what's a bonded carrier? It means that they seal up the truck at the Canadian border, and the Canadian government agrees that whatever's in there, it's basically in the U.S. and it never entered Canada. And then it gets unsealed when the truck arrives in Point Roberts, and that is basically how stuff gets in. So things that would be prohibited agricultural items can come in that way. Things that are, that would be charged tax in Canada can come in that way. The service isn't cheap. It is available, and it's just part of the cost of doing business when you live on the point. Anything that you can order from UPS and FedEx will show up, just like if you were anywhere else in the United States, and USPS as well. So all of those are bonded carriers too. The thing is that UPS only deals with stuff up to 70 pounds. So if you want to order something bigger, it's going to end up delivered through Point Roberts Auto Freight usually. And then one thing that I think is kind of funny is because you can order anything online and have it delivered to Point Roberts, and it's being delivered to the U.S., but it's right next to Canada. A lot of Canadians do their online shopping on U.S. sites where goods can be cheaper, or there's a wider variety of stuff, or things are available often in the U.S. before they're available in Canada. And so there's this cottage industry of places where you can just have your package sent in Point Roberts, and for $2 or $3, they'll receive it for you, and you can come down and get it from Canada. So that's kind of cool. But there's challenges. The border does create a real barrier and a psychological barrier. There's, you need bonded carriers for large items. Online shopping has a more limited selection. If you go to Amazon and you punch in a rural zip code anywhere in the rural U.S., I lived in the outskirts of Olympia before, and it was the same kind of thing, right? You don't get that like Amazon Prime Now stuff that can be delivered today or by Amazon trucks only. That's not going to be available. So if anything that Amazon can send you via UPS or FedEx or Walmart or any of your online retailers, that's the stuff that you're going to have the selection to do. This gets to be a really big problem with Walmart, because they default to using DoorDash to send you stuff like out of the grocery section, and then you get all the way to the end and you find out you can't do it. You'll get used to this once and knowing what kind of items you can get and not. Cannabis is effectively illegal, as I brought up, and availability of services can be a challenge, right? It's a really small community with 850 people who live there year-round, and that means that if there's an electrician who prefers large jobs, so your small electrical jobs are going to be on a waiting list, and it could be a while before they get done. There's one guy that does roofs, and his son, they're really good, but they have a really long waiting list because they roof every house on the point. There's 2 landscaping companies, and they're just not taking new clients. And there's one plumber who's semi-retired and lives in Canada. He's a dual citizen. So what's the opportunity? It's unincorporated Whatcom County. What does that mean? And you know me. You know there's going to be something conspiratorial here, right? So unincorporated Whatcom County means that there's very few regulations. If you live in an unincorporated part of a county, there's no city police, there's no city regulations, there's just none of that. So the things that you may want to do on your land that are crazy ideas anywhere else, you can totally do on Point Roberts, possibly. Only around 850 people live there year-round. Most are retired, 2/3, 3/4, depending how you count, are dual citizens. They don't like change, but they know that a reboot's needed for the community to survive. So many people left during the 15 months that the border was closed that there's just something different than what they've done before is going to be needed. And the place literally exists because of a border hack. Their whole history has been geographic arbitrage. So if there's anywhere in the world that's hacker friendly, this place is. And so what's my pitch? If we want to turn a place into, I'm wearing a tour camp shirt, and Point Roberts is around 25 miles or 20 miles northwest of tour camp. And so if you've been to tour camp, you know that when hackers gather and get the opportunity to be creative together in one place, a lot of magic happens, because when you have enough of a concentration of hackers, the amount of creativity and awesomeness that happens is really very difficult to match anywhere else in the world. And we do the same thing at Hacker Summer Camp every year in Las Vegas, right? When all of us come together and make a lot of really cool stuff happen. And so I was thinking, why can't it be tour camp every day? Why can't it be DEF CON and B-Sides all the time? And one way that could happen is if you have a place that's safe, it's geographically distributed, there's the ability, it's geographically restricted, it's close to the amenities of a major city, so you can get to an airport in 25 minutes. You have access to all of the stuff of a world-class city like Vancouver can offer, but you get to live around a whole bunch of really smart, creative, awesome hackers. And so somebody had to be first, so I moved, but I don't need to be the only hacker who lives there. And I'd like to invite all of the people who are watching this on the stream or here in the room. If you want to check the place out, I've got a pretty big house. I didn't mean to buy something that big. There's just not a lot for sale there. Plenty of extra room. Hit me up. Happy to invite you to check it out and kick the tires. And with that, there's my contact information, tProphet at tProphet.org, or you can hit me on Twitter at tProphet. And By the way, like shameless plug, if you want to work from the beach with me, my employer is hiring senior security architects and engineers for full remote roles. So feel free to hit me up with any questions about those too. They are not a B-side sponsor, so it's just a shameless plug. And with that, I'll open up for questions if anybody has any. There is a hand raised. Blue shirt. Yeah, sure. So the question was for people on the stream, hey, there's this small matter of the fact that your border was closed for 15 months so nobody could leave, like during the pandemic. Would you care to address that? Yes. So what happened is the Canadian government and the U.S. government agreed to mutually shut the border, which is the first time in history that's happened, and it was closed for 15 months. And there was no exception for initially for border communities and border-dependent communities on both sides of the border. That created a lot of problems, and obviously the gears of government turned slowly in both Washington, D.C. and Ottawa, especially during a pandemic when nobody knows how to coordinate anything and they're all trying to figure out how to work remotely. After a couple of months, the Canadian government ended up coming out with an exception for essential services. So what they would do is they'd let you through to the mainland of Washington if you didn't stop in Canada at all for anything that they deemed essential. The problem was that, if your horse has an eye infection and is losing an eye, as happened to one person's horse, or my neighbor's cat had a kidney problem and couldn't pee for 2 days and was in excruciating pain and nearly died, it was up to the border guard that you got and whether or not they considered that to be essential or not. And some border guards had a more generous interpretation of that than others. So, the horse lost its eye. I understand my neighbor threatened to abandon the cat at the border in Canada, at which point then it would be an animal welfare issue that they'd have to deal with, and that was the way that she was able to take it to the vet. But anyhow, it was really rough for a while, and then the Canadian government gradually loosened restrictions. And look, I get it. They had a really big problem early with Americans claiming they were going to Alaska and then going and taking vacations in Alberta. And, in some cases, people brought COVID with them and they'd had it really well under control. So I get why they were so conservative. Also, Canada has socialized healthcare. So they're thinking from a perspective of what do they need to do to maintain the public health and not have to spend crazy amounts of money. I mean, they can't just dump the problem on their population. They have to deal with it. So their government was way more conservative than ours. Whether or not that was the right decision, that's for history to decide. It was pretty rough for a while. These days, you have to fill out a ArriveCAN. That's it. The border's open. Canada's open for business. We're welcome again. Canadian people are not mad at us. There's no vandalism of cars that was going on earlier because, the Canadian public was just outraged when people were using the Alaska border hack, when people were saying that they were going to Alaska and really they went on vacation in Canada. That was just completely outrageous to the Canadian public. And so there was some public anger and outrage that resulted from that. But things have blown over these days. Canadians are pretty good-natured overall. So it's water under the bridge at this point. And, we're pretty close to back to business as usual, as much as we can be in a pandemic. Any other, yeah. So the question is, you live in the Pacific Northwest, also known as the Pacific Northwet, where it's famous for being cloudy all the time. And if I have seasonal affective disorder, am I going to get that if I move to your rainy corner of the world where it's very gloomy and rainy all the time? And the good news is probably not on Point Roberts specifically because it's in a rain shadow. Point Roberts and Tawasin just happen to be in a spot where the clouds are mostly blocked by a mountain on Vancouver Island across the water, which is maybe 30 miles away. And so we get more sun than anywhere else in the lower mainland. It does rain still, just like it can pretty much anywhere outside of the Southwest, but it's not nearly as bad as you would think. The thing that you do need to keep in mind is if you need to get sunlight, our days are really short in the winter. So it can be, sometimes 7 or 8 hours of daylight maybe. So the thing is, if you work remote and you can walk to the beach and take your meetings there, it's not all that cold. It does not get super cold in the Pacific Northwest because our climate is moderated by the water. And so I take a walk every day, even in the winter. It snowed once over the winter, but that's pretty rare. Any other questions? This Lefroy 25 is phenomenal, by the way. I've never had it, so I hope I don't have a new habit of a $550 a bottle scotch. Thank you, BSides, for this. Anything else? Yes, no, maybe? All right, so I don't see any other questions from the audience, but again, I'm totally serious. I think that it is time to build a hacker city. If it's not Point Roberts, it should be somewhere, but why not Point Roberts?